God bless. How are you guys doing today?
Excellent.
Excellent. Okay, excellent. Well, what I want to get into this morning is the importance of not allowing the world to define who we are. And I'll go one step further in saying not to allow the world or friends, enemies, whoever, to define how far we can go or what we can accomplish. Take a look, if you would, at 2 Kings chapter 7. Now, in 2 Kings chapter 7, the city has been surrounded. They're under siege. They're being starved out. So if you go back to chapter 6, and if you look at verse 28, you find out where there are two women. The siege is so great and the famine is so great that, well, let me read it to you. And the king said unto her, What aileth thee? What aileth thee? And she answered, This woman said unto me, Give thy son that we may eat him today, and we will eat my son tomorrow. In other words, it was so great that they had resorted to cannibalism. And if you know anything about a woman and her child, I think about Cindy when she was talking about her grandchildren last night. You could tell it just melted her heart to even talk about them, even think about them. In the animal kingdom, a bear, the last thing on earth you want to do is get between a mother and a child. If you have just declared war on her and her entire family, and you better be ready to fight. Because mama bears do not appreciate anything that threatens or they perceive as a threat to their children. Yet, this famine was so great that these women considered and actually killed one of the kids to eat. That's pretty great. But the complaint that this woman was giving to the king was that, that she had said, the other woman had said, let's kill your child and eat him today, and then tomorrow we'll eat my child. Let's find out what happened. So we boiled my son and did eat him. That would be tough to do. And I said unto her on the next day, Give thy son that we may eat him. And what did she do? And she hath hid him. She has hid her son. I would tend to be more like the second woman, personally. But again, the times were so dire and so critical of whatever that from a five senses point of view, the best thing, the only thing they could do to survive was to resort to cannibalism. And while they were eating this one woman's child, they boiled him and ate him. They did it, and that was a survival tool, whatever they needed to do to survive. On the second day, though, and what this woman was complaining to the king about was that when it came time to kill this other child and boil him, then she hid her child. That's how great the famine was. Now let's go down to chapter 7, and we'll see what the man of God does about this. Then Elijah said, Hear ye the words of the Lord. Thus saith the Lord, Tomorrow about this time shall a measure of fine flour be sold for a shekel, and 2 measures of barley for a shekel, in the gate of Samaria. Now, Samaria was a city that had been besieged. Samaria, the famine was so great that these women were killing their own children to survive. Yet the man of God says that tomorrow at this time, that the situation is going to turn around completely. Five senses wise, was it going to turn around? No. They had been under siege for a number of days, I would imagine probably about a month. All of their food supplies had run out. and they were in great dire need of food. And yet the man of God says, by tomorrow, hey, you'll be able to pick up some fine meal, fine flour for $1. Back to pretty much normal. Now, I don't know what that would have been, maybe a pound, 2 pounds, whatever. But it's going to cost you about $1. 5 senses wise, it looked like it was impossible. But remember what the angel told Abraham? With God, nothing is impossible. Just because we are at a particular place today doesn't mean that within 24 hours God can't turn that situation around. And John and I were talking, my son, and I was telling him that when I was a police officer in Fairbanks, Alaska, I had just reached my limit. The prejudice, the Mickey Mouse politics in the office were more than I could handle. So I prayed that night. We were running foundational class, and that night about 10:30, I was supposed to be at work at I think 11 or midnight or something like that to start my shift. Somebody came over, one of the other fellow officers who lived where we lived, knocked on my door, and I had taken my phone off the hook to run the class. And he said, the chief of police called and said that you're not to be in tomorrow, or you're not to come in tonight, but to be in his office at 7 o'clock in the morning. And I thought, okay, that all I need now is get reproved by the chief of police. But I had the night off, and I was blessed because I didn't have to go face that Mickey Mouse again. So at 7 o'clock the next morning, I was in the chief's office, and he said, Gary, I have a special assignment for you. I want you to turn in your uniforms. We will issue you clothing. You'll get a suit. You'll get a couple of suits made, and slacks, and everything you need, and you'll be the new CSO, the new Community Services Officer, from this day forward. The only person I had to report to after that was the chief of police himself. And he and I got along great. But all of those Mickey Mouse lieutenants and sergeants, and it was through no fault of my own, because I did my job and I did it well. But they, for whatever reason, had gotten it into their heads, and they had sided against me. No weapon formed against you shall prosper. That's what the word says. Now, within 24 hours, my situation turned around. God can do it because he did it for me. But let me show you what he did here. Now, to bring this to pass, the man of God has said that this situation is going to be turned around in 24 hours. 24 hours. And stop and think about what situations you are in or you have need of that you want to see turned around in 24 hours. And let's see what God did here. Okay, verse 2. Then a Lord whose hand the king leaned on answered the king, or answered the man of God and said, Behold, if the Lord would make, wait a minute, let me back up and start over again. Then a Lord on whose hand the king leaned answered and said, to the man of God, Behold, if the Lord would make the windows of heaven open up, basically what he's talking about, might this thing be so? In other words, I don't care if God opened up the windows of heaven right now, this thing could not come to pass, is what this guy, the chief advisor to the king, is saying. The man of God has just said, by this time tomorrow, it's going to be. This man, who is the king's chief assistant, is saying, no way. That's what he's saying. And he said, Behold, thou shalt see with thine own eyes, but thou shalt not eat thereof. So Elijah tells this man, okay, you want to be negative? You want to speak against what I'm telling you, what God is telling you is going to happen? Then fine. You will see it with your own eyes, but you will not partake of it. Watch what comes out of your mouth. watch what comes out of your mouth, because it may get you in trouble. And there were 4 leprous men at the entering in the gate. And they said one to another, why sit we here until we die? Well, here's the situation. God has just said through Elijah that by this time tomorrow, this whole situation is going to do a 180. Right now, it is so bad that we're resorting to cannibalism. By tomorrow, everything will be back to 100% normal by this time tomorrow. Now, what we have to decide by our actions